The Age of Exploration was a transformative period in human history, during which European nations expanded their horizons beyond familiar territories, seeking new trade routes, resources, and knowledge. This era, spanning from the 15th to the 17th century, was marked by ambitious voyages that reshaped the global landscape and laid the foundation for modern geopolitics. Among the many explorers who played a crucial role in this process, Bartolomeu Dias stands out as a pioneer who changed the course of maritime history. His daring expedition around the southern tip of Africa opened the path to Asia, redefining global trade and navigation. Bartolomeu Dias' journey was not merely a geographical achievement. It was a testament to human perseverance and ingenuity. Before his voyage, European maps were incomplete, and there was widespread uncertainty about what lay beyond the African coast. Some scholars and sailors feared that the seas beyond a certain latitude were impassable, filled with mythical creatures or endless storms. Dias' expedition dispelled these fears, proving that a sea route to the Indian Ocean was possible. This discovery accelerated European expansion, establishing Portugal as a dominant maritime power. To fully appreciate the significance of Dias' achievements, it is essential to understand the broader historical context in which he operated. The 15th century was a time of fierce competition among European nations, particularly between Portugal and Spain, as they sought to find alternative trade routes to the riches of Asia. The Silk Road, which had long connected Europe with the East, had become increasingly dangerous and costly due to conflicts and territorial disputes. The Portuguese, under the leadership of Prince Henry the Navigator and later King João II, invested heavily in maritime exploration, hoping to circumvent these overland routes and establish direct access to Asian markets. Portugal's exploration efforts were guided by a combination of economic, religious, and scientific motivations. The promise of lucrative trade in spices, gold, and exotic goods was a driving force behind their maritime expansion. At the same time, the Portuguese were deeply influenced by their Christian faith, seeing exploration as a means to spread Christianity and establish alliances against Islamic powers. Scientific curiosity also played a role, as advances in navigation, cartography, and shipbuilding made longer and more ambitious voyages possible. Bartolomeu Dias' expedition was a direct product of these intersecting motivations. Despite the grandeur of exploration, such journeys were fraught with risks. Sailors faced unknown waters, unpredictable weather, and the constant threat of scurvy and other diseases. Many expeditions ended in failure, with ships lost at sea and crews perishing in the process. Yet, the courage of explorers like Dias pushed the boundaries of what was known, demonstrating the resilience of the human spirit. His expedition, undertaken between 1487 and 1488, was not only a technical success, but also a psychological breakthrough, proving that the feared edge of the world did not exist. Dias' achievement was not immediately recognized in its full magnitude. While his successful navigation around the Cape of Good Hope was a monumental step forward, the direct route to India was still uncharted. It would take Vasco da Gama's later expedition to fully realize the potential of Dias' discovery. Nevertheless, without Dias' pioneering voyage, the expansion of Portuguese influence into the Indian Ocean would have been significantly delayed, altering the course of world history. His journey also had profound implications beyond Portugal. The discovery of the sea route around Africa laid the foundation for the European colonization of Asia and Africa. It shifted global trade dynamics, reducing the importance of land-based trade routes and increasing European dominance in maritime commerce. This transformation set the stage for centuries of imperial expansion, for better or worse, shaping the economic and political landscape of the modern world. In studying Bartolomeu Dias, one must not only consider the historical consequences of his voyage, but also the personal qualities that defined him as an explorer. Courage, determination, and strategic thinking were essential traits for any navigator venturing into the unknown. Dias embodied these qualities, demonstrating exceptional leadership in the face of adversity. His ability to command a crew through treacherous conditions and make difficult decisions under pressure speaks to his remarkable skill as a navigator and leader. This dissertation will explore Bartolomeu Dias' life, his historic voyage, and the lasting impact of his discoveries. It will delve into the geopolitical context of Portuguese exploration, the challenges of maritime travel in the 15th century, and the consequences of his journey on global trade and colonial expansion. Each chapter will build upon the previous, painting a comprehensive picture of one of the most significant figures in the age of exploration. Bartolomeu Dias' name may not be as widely recognized as that of Christopher Columbus or Ferdinand Magellan, but his contributions to world history are no less important. His journey marked a turning point in navigation, proving that the Atlantic and Indian Oceans were connected. In doing so, he laid the groundwork for the first global trade networks, forever altering human civilization. Understanding his story is not just an exploration of the past. It is an examination of the courage and vision that drive progress. The 15th century was a period of profound transformation in Europe, marked by the rise of nation-states, economic expansion, and scientific advancements. Among the most ambitious and forward-thinking of these emerging powers was Portugal, a small kingdom on the Iberian Peninsula that would come to dominate global maritime exploration. Portuguese navigators, driven by a combination of economic ambition, religious fervor, and scientific curiosity, played a crucial role in expanding the known world. Bartolomeu Dias' expedition must be understood within this broader context of Portuguese exploration and the relentless quest to find a sea route to the riches of Asia. One of the primary motivations behind Portuguese exploration was the search for a direct trade route to the lucrative markets of India and the Far East. For centuries, European merchants had relied on overland routes, such as the Silk Road, to acquire spices, silk, and precious stones. However, these routes were fraught with challenges, including high tariffs imposed by intermediary traders, political instability, and the growing dominance of the Ottoman Empire, which controlled much of the trade between East and West. By the mid-15th century, it became increasingly clear that alternative routes were necessary for Portugal to compete economically with other European powers. Under the leadership of Prince Henry the Navigator, Portugal took a systematic approach to exploration. Although Henry himself never embarked on major voyages, his patronage of expeditions, cartographic studies, and advancements in shipbuilding helped lay the foundation for later discoveries. His establishment of a navigation school in Sagres attracted some of the best minds in Europe, including geographers, astronomers, and shipbuilders, all of whom contributed to the development of more efficient navigational techniques. This period saw the refinement of the caravel, a highly maneuverable ship capable of withstanding long oceanic journeys, which would prove essential to explorers like Bartolomeu Dias. By the time King João II ascended to the throne in 1481, Portugal had already made significant progress in exploring the African coast. Earlier expeditions had successfully reached the Gulf of Guinea, establishing trade relations and mapping previously unknown territories. However, the ultimate goal remained elusive: to find a navigable route around the southern tip of Africa, which would provide a direct connection between Europe and the Indian Ocean. The challenge was not merely geographical, but also psychological, as many sailors feared the unknown waters beyond the equator, believing in myths of sea monsters and impassable storms. King João II intensified efforts to push beyond the known world, commissioning expeditions with the express purpose of rounding Africa's southernmost point. His vision extended beyond mere exploration. He sought to establish Portuguese dominance in the spice trade and secure a strategic advantage over rival European powers. Bartolomeu Dias, an experienced navigator and skilled mariner, was chosen to lead this critical mission in 1487. His expedition was not the first attempt to reach the Indian Ocean, but it would become the most consequential, forever changing the course of maritime history. Portuguese exploration was not driven solely by economic interests. Religious motivations also played a significant role in shaping the ambitions of the Portuguese monarchy. The desire to spread Christianity and forge alliances against Islamic powers, particularly the Ottoman Empire, influenced many decisions related to exploration. One of the enduring legends that motivated Portuguese expeditions was the mythical figure of Prester John, a supposed Christian ruler in Africa or Asia who was believed to be waiting for European assistance in a joint struggle against Muslim forces. While no such ruler was ever found, the myth inspired explorers to push further into unknown territories. Advancements in navigation and cartography during the 15th century were instrumental in enabling these ambitious expeditions. The development of the astrolabe and the quadrant allowed sailors to determine latitude more accurately, while improved maps, such as those created by the Cantino planisphere, provided better guidance for long-distance voyages. Portuguese navigators also benefited from the accumulated knowledge of Arab and Italian scholars, whose expertise in astronomy and geography contributed to the success of their journeys. This fusion of knowledge and innovation created a strong foundation for maritime expansion. The Treaty of Alcacovas, signed in 1479 between Portugal and Castile, further shaped the geopolitical landscape of exploration. This treaty granted Portugal control over the African coast and its exploration rights, while Spain focused its efforts on the Canary Islands and, later, the New World. This division of influence allowed Portugal to concentrate its resources on developing a southern maritime route, leading to the eventual breakthrough achieved by Bartolomeu Dias. Without this agreement, competition with Spain might have hindered Portugal's ability to focus on its African expeditions. Despite the optimism surrounding Portuguese exploration, the risks were immense. The waters beyond the equator were largely uncharted, and reports from previous expeditions suggested treacherous conditions. Storms, unpredictable currents, and the sheer vastness of the Atlantic Ocean posed significant challenges to even the most experienced navigators. The physical and psychological toll on sailors was enormous, as many voyages lasted for months or even years without contact with home. It was in this high-stakes environment that Bartolomeu Dias prepared for his historic journey. As Bartolomeu Dias set sail in 1487, he carried with him not only the hopes of the Portuguese crown, but also the weight of centuries of exploration efforts. His voyage would test the limits of human endurance and technological progress, ultimately proving that the Atlantic and Indian Oceans were connected. By placing his journey within the broader historical context of Portuguese expansion, we gain a deeper understanding of the motivations, challenges, and significance of his achievements. His expedition was not an isolated event, but the culmination of decades of ambition, planning, and innovation that defined Portugal's role as a global maritime power. Bartolomeu Dias remains one of the most influential figures in the history of maritime exploration, yet little is known about his early life. Unlike some of his contemporaries, such as Christopher Columbus or Vasco da Gama, historical records provide limited information regarding his childhood, family background, and formative years. However, what is certain is that Dias was born in the Kingdom of Portugal around the year 1450, during a period when Portugal was emerging as a dominant force in global exploration. His upbringing, education, and early naval experience undoubtedly shaped him into the skilled navigator and leader he would later become. Dias was likely born into a noble or well-respected family, as was common among Portuguese explorers of the time. It is believed that he was related to João Dias, a knight who had previously sailed along the West African coast, and Dinis Dias, an explorer who reached the Senegal River in the 1440s. If this connection is accurate, it suggests that Bartolomeu Dias came from a lineage of seafarers and adventurers, which would have significantly influenced his career path. Growing up in such an environment would have exposed him to the maritime culture that was central to Portugal's expansionist ambitions. The education of Portuguese nobles during this period typically included training in navigation, cartography, mathematics, and military strategy. Dias would have likely studied these subjects, preparing him for a career in service of the crown. Portugal had established itself as a leading force in naval technology, and aspiring sailors were trained in the use of navigational instruments, such as the astrolabe and quadrant. Additionally, Dias would have been exposed to shipbuilding techniques and the latest advancements in sailing, ensuring that he possessed the technical knowledge required for long voyages. Beyond theoretical knowledge, practical experience at sea was crucial for any aspiring navigator. Dias likely spent much of his early career aboard Portuguese caravels, participating in expeditions along the African coast. By the mid-15th century, Portuguese explorers had already established trade routes along the Gulf of Guinea, and numerous missions were dispatched to explore the western coast of Africa. Given his later accomplishments, it is highly probable that Dias served on these voyages, gaining first-hand experience in the challenges of long-distance navigation and the unpredictable nature of the Atlantic Ocean. In addition to his navigational expertise, Dias would have also received military training. Exploration during this era was not merely about discovery. It often involved conflicts with indigenous populations, rival European powers, and even mutinous crew members. Portuguese explorers were expected to defend their ships, negotiate trade agreements, and establish fortified settlements when necessary. As a result, Dias likely acquired skills in diplomacy, combat, and leadership, which would later prove invaluable when commanding his own expedition. One of the key qualities that distinguished successful explorers from those who failed was their ability to lead under extreme conditions. The psychological and physical challenges of long sea voyages were immense. Months or even years away from home, the constant threat of storms, food shortages, and the potential for disease took a severe toll on sailors. A leader had to inspire confidence, maintain discipline, and make critical decisions under pressure. Dias, through his early experiences, must have demonstrated these qualities, as he was later entrusted with one of Portugal's most significant expeditions. By the time King João II appointed him to lead the 1487 voyage around Africa's southern tip, Dias had already built a reputation as a skilled and capable mariner. His selection for this mission was not accidental. It was a testament to his experience, resilience, and ability to handle the unknown. The Portuguese crown would not have chosen an inexperienced or untested sailor for such an ambitious journey. Dias' prior service in the Navy and his familiarity with the African coast positioned him as the ideal candidate for this endeavor. While details of his early personal life remain scarce, what can be inferred from his later achievements is that he was a man of exceptional intelligence and determination. He was not merely a sailor following orders, but a visionary who understood the significance of his mission. Unlike some explorers who sought fame or wealth, Dias appeared primarily motivated by the challenge of discovery itself. His ability to push beyond the known world and navigate uncharted waters suggests a deep curiosity and commitment to expanding human knowledge. Despite the lack of detailed records about his early years, Bartolomeu Dias' legacy speaks volumes about the kind of person he was. His successful circumnavigation of the Cape of Good Hope was not a result of chance, but of years of preparation, training, and practical experience. He belonged to a generation of Portuguese navigators who dedicated their lives to the pursuit of new frontiers, often risking everything in the process. His journey was not just a singular achievement, but part of a broader effort that defined the age of exploration. By the late 15th century, Portugal had established itself as a formidable maritime power, yet the ultimate goal of its exploratory missions remained unfulfilled: the discovery of a sea route to India. King João II, recognizing the economic and strategic advantages of controlling such a route, intensified efforts to bypass the overland trade networks dominated by Islamic and Venetian merchants. This mission was entrusted to Bartolomeu Dias, an experienced navigator whose skill and leadership made him the ideal candidate to accomplish this daunting task. The Portuguese sought to find a passage around the southern tip of Africa, a challenge that had eluded previous explorers. Navigators had successfully charted much of the West African coast, establishing trading posts and acquiring valuable goods such as gold, ivory, and slaves. However, no European had yet determined whether Africa could be circumnavigated by sea, and many still doubted whether a navigable passage to the Indian Ocean even existed. Dias' mission was to settle this question once and for all. The decision to commission Dias' expedition was part of a broader strategic plan by King João II. The Portuguese monarch had long envisioned establishing direct trade with India and eliminating the need to rely on costly intermediaries. This ambition was not merely economic, but also geopolitical. If Portugal could gain direct access to Asian markets, it would undermine the dominance of the Ottoman Empire and Venetian traders, positioning Portugal as the leading European power in global commerce. Additionally, The mission aligned with the religious goal of spreading Christianity and forming alliances against Muslim forces. Dias' expedition was meticulously planned. The fleet consisted of 3 ships, 2 caravels, and a support vessel for supplies. The ships were outfitted with the latest navigational instruments, including the astrolabe and quadrant, and were designed to withstand the harsh conditions of the open ocean. Caravels, with their advanced sailing capabilities, allowed for greater maneuverability, making them well-suited for long-distance voyages. The crew included experienced sailors, navigators, and interpreters, ensuring that Dias had the necessary expertise to complete his mission. The expedition set sail from Lisbon in the summer of 1487. The early phase of the journey followed the well-charted route along the West African coast, where Portuguese explorers had previously established contact with local kingdoms. As Dias ventured further south, the crew faced increasingly difficult conditions, including treacherous currents, violent storms, and unpredictable winds. These challenges tested their endurance and navigational skills, pushing them to the limits of their capabilities. One of the most significant innovations that aided the expedition was the practice of volta do mar, a technique in which sailors deliberately sailed westward into the Atlantic to take advantage of favorable wind patterns before turning back toward Africa. This method, developed by Portuguese navigators, was crucial in overcoming the adverse winds along the African coast. By employing this technique, Dias was able to navigate more effectively, although the journey remained perilous. As the fleet approached the southernmost regions of Africa, they encountered increasingly rough seas. At some point in early 1488, after weeks of battling strong winds and heavy swells, Dias' ships were blown far off course, deep into the South Atlantic. When they finally managed to turn eastward and then north, they made a startling realization. They had unknowingly rounded the southern tip of Africa. Dias had succeeded where no European had before. He had found the gateway to the Indian Ocean. The significance of this discovery was profound. By rounding the Cape of Good Hope, Dias had proved that Africa did not extend indefinitely southward and that the Atlantic and Indian Oceans were connected. This revelation paved the way for future expeditions, particularly Vasco da Gama's successful voyage to India a decade later. However, despite this breakthrough, Dias' journey was far from over, and he faced difficult decisions regarding how far to push forward before returning to Portugal. The expedition continued along the southeastern coast of Africa, reaching what is now Mossel Bay. However, faced with an exhausted crew and dwindling supplies, Dias was forced to turn back before reaching India. His crew, having endured months of hardship, reportedly pressured him into making the decision, illustrating the immense physical and psychological toll such voyages took on sailors. Despite not reaching India, Dias had achieved the primary objective of his mission, proving that a sea route to the east was possible. As he made his return voyage to Portugal, Dias established key navigational markers along the way, ensuring that future explorers could follow his route. Upon his arrival in Lisbon in 1488, he presented his findings to King João II, who recognized the significance of the discovery but was focused on other pressing matters. Although Dias did not immediately receive the acclaim he deserved, his voyage laid the foundation for Portugal's future dominance in global trade. His journey marked the turning point in European exploration, setting the stage for the creation of a vast Portuguese empire that would extend from Africa to Asia. Bartolomeu Dias' most significant achievement, the first recorded successful rounding of the southern tip of Africa, marked a turning point in global exploration. Until his voyage, many European navigators speculated about whether a sea route around Africa was feasible, and his discovery shattered the uncertainty that had surrounded the African continent's geography. His expedition, undertaken under extreme conditions, not only proved that the Atlantic and Indian Oceans were connected, but also laid the foundation for future maritime expansion, particularly Portugal's dominance in the Indian Ocean trade. As Dias' fleet moved further southward along the African coastline, the journey became increasingly treacherous. The expedition faced powerful winds, unpredictable ocean currents, and the sheer vastness of the uncharted waters. It is believed that sometime in early 1488, Dias and his crew were caught in a violent storm that forced them to sail westward, away from the African coast. This unintended detour ultimately became the key to their success. When they finally regained control of their ships and adjusted their course eastward, they realized they had unknowingly passed the southern tip of Africa. Upon sailing northward again, Dias and his crew sighted land at what is now known as Mossel Bay on the southeastern coast of South Africa. It was at this moment that the realization struck. They had successfully rounded the previously unknown southernmost point of the continent. The discovery of this passage was revolutionary. Not only did it provide a navigable sea route toward India, but it also dispelled centuries-old fears that the waters beyond the African coast were impassable. Dias named this critical landmark Cabo das Tormentas, Cape of Storms, in reference to the violent weather conditions his fleet had encountered. This name accurately reflected the dangers of the region. Powerful winds and enormous waves made navigation extremely hazardous. However, upon Dias' return to Portugal, King João II chose to rename it Cabo de Boa Esperança, Cape of Good Hope, signifying the optimism that this new passage instilled in Portugal's quest to reach India. The new name also aligned with Portugal's broader vision of establishing a direct trade route to Asia, which would bring immense economic and geopolitical advantages. The rounding of the Cape of Good Hope was not merely a geographical accomplishment. It was also a technological and strategic success. Portuguese navigators had mastered techniques such as the Volta do Mar, which allowed them to harness wind patterns more effectively. The ability to understand and manipulate oceanic currents, combined with advancements in shipbuilding, particularly the maneuverability of the caravel, enabled Dias to navigate waters that had previously been considered impossible to cross. These factors contributed to the triumph of his mission. Another crucial aspect of this expedition was the interactions between Dias' crew and the indigenous peoples of the region. As they traveled along the southeastern coast of Africa, the Portuguese made contact with local inhabitants who had never before encountered Europeans. Historical records suggest that these interactions were not always peaceful. Conflicts arose due to cultural misunderstandings and competition over resources. However, these encounters provided valuable insights into the local geography, trade opportunities, and political structures of the region, which would be essential for future Portuguese ventures. Despite the success of the expedition, Dias faced opposition from his own crew. The journey had been grueling, and many sailors were exhausted after months at sea. Reports indicate that the crew, fearing they had sailed too far from home and facing dwindling supplies, pressured Dias to turn back before reaching India. Although Dias himself may have wished to press forward, he ultimately had to make the difficult decision to return to Portugal. This decision highlights the delicate balance that explorers had to maintain, pushing the boundaries of discovery while also ensuring the survival and morale of their crew. On the return voyage, Dias took the opportunity to map the route more carefully and establish padrões, stone markers bearing the Portuguese coat of arms, to assert Portugal's claim over the newly discovered lands. These markers served as navigational aids for future explorers and symbolized Portugal's intention to establish dominance over the region. The presence of these markers demonstrated that Portugal was not merely exploring, but actively laying the groundwork for a maritime empire. When Dias finally returned to Lisbon in 1488, he presented his findings to King João II. While the king recognized the importance of his voyage, the geopolitical climate at the time meant that immediate efforts to follow up on the discovery were delayed. Other priorities, such as securing Portugal's dominance over West African trade routes and navigating diplomatic tensions with Spain, took precedence. It would not be until Vasco da Gama's famous voyage in 1497 that Portugal would finally complete the journey to India, using the route that Dias had pioneered. Despite the fact that Dias did not personally reach India, his successful navigation of the Cape of Good Hope was a pivotal moment in the age of exploration. His voyage demonstrated that a sea route to Asia was possible, shifting the focus of European maritime efforts and accelerating Portugal's expansion. The route he charted would later become one of the most critical trade passages in history, connecting Europe to the riches of the East. His achievement was not merely a triumph for Portugal, but a breakthrough that reshaped global commerce and exploration for centuries to come. The successful rounding of the Cape of Good Hope by Bartolomeu Dias in 1488 was more than just a geographical breakthrough. It was a defining moment in the history of Portuguese expansion. His voyage proved that a sea route to India was not only possible but also practical, setting the stage for Portugal's dominance in the Indian Ocean trade. This discovery had profound economic, political, and military consequences, shaping the course of global exploration and commerce for centuries to come. One of the immediate effects of Dias' expedition was the confirmation of King João II's vision, the potential for Portugal to establish direct maritime trade with Asia. The spice trade, particularly in highly sought-after commodities such as pepper, cinnamon, and cloves, had been controlled by Muslim and Venetian merchants, forcing European nations to pay exorbitant prices for these goods. By finding a route around Africa, Portugal could bypass these middlemen, reducing costs and increasing profits. This promise of economic gain motivated the Portuguese crown to further invest in exploration and naval expansion. Despite the significance of Dias' discovery, Portugal did not immediately act upon it. In the years following his return, the country was preoccupied with territorial disputes with Spain, leading to the signing of the Treaty of Tordesillas in 1494, which divided newly discovered lands between the two nations. Additionally, King João II passed away in 1495, and his successor, King Manuel I, initially had other priorities. However, by the end of the decade, the Portuguese crown fully embraced the possibilities opened by Dias, culminating in Vasco da Gama's voyage to India in 1497. The impact of Dias' expedition was not limited to trade. It also revolutionized maritime strategy. Prior to his voyage, European navigators had only ventured along the western coast of Africa, establishing trading posts but not fully committing to long-term maritime expansion. With the discovery of a route around Africa, Portugal began to develop a systematic strategy of naval dominance, constructing fortified bases along the coastline to secure its trade routes. These outposts, such as those in Mozambique and Mombasa, would later serve as critical supply stations for Portuguese ships on their way to India. Another consequence of Dias' discovery was the increasing militarization of Portuguese expeditions. As Portugal moved toward full-scale colonization and control of trade networks, it became necessary to arm its fleets and establish naval superiority over both indigenous groups and competing European powers. This transformation began with Dias himself, who later participated in the construction of warships for future expeditions, including those used by Vasco da Gama. Portugal's shift toward maritime militarization was a direct result of the realization that controlling the Indian Ocean trade required both navigation and force. Furthermore, the successful rounding of the Cape of Good Hope accelerated Portugal's ambitions to spread Christianity along its newly discovered routes. Religious motivations had always been intertwined with economic interests, and the Portuguese monarchy saw itself as a defender of Christianity against Islamic expansion. Portuguese explorers, including Dias, were often tasked with seeking alliances with Christian rulers in Africa and Asia, such as the mythical Prester John, a supposed Christian king in Ethiopia. While Dias' voyage did not lead to immediate religious conversions, it laid the groundwork for future missionary efforts in Africa and Asia. Dias' expedition also had a significant psychological impact on European perceptions of the world. Prior to his voyage, there were lingering doubts about the feasibility of long-distance sea travel, particularly in unknown waters. His success demonstrated that the world was navigable in ways previously unimagined, encouraging more ambitious explorations. The notion that oceanic exploration could lead to immense wealth and territorial expansion inspired other European powers, including Spain, to intensify their own maritime efforts. Just 4 years after Dias' return, Christopher Columbus embarked on his journey westward, seeking an alternative route to Asia. Despite his achievements, Dias did not immediately receive widespread recognition. Unlike Vasco da Gama, whose voyage to India brought him fame and rewards, Dias remained somewhat overshadowed in historical narratives. However, His contributions to the success of Portuguese exploration were undeniable. He played a crucial role in preparing and advising da Gama's expedition, using his experience to ensure that the next mission had the best possible chance of success. His expertise in ship design and navigation was essential in the development of the fleets that would later dominate the Indian Ocean. In the long term, the discovery of the sea route around Africa led to the establishment of the Portuguese Empire in Asia, with trading outposts stretching from Mozambique to Goa, Malacca, and eventually China. This network of maritime dominance allowed Portugal to control critical trade routes and monopolize the spice trade for nearly a century. The wealth generated from this commerce transformed Portugal into one of the most powerful nations of the 16th century, demonstrating the far-reaching consequences of Dias' initial voyage. Ultimately, Bartolomeu Dias' expedition was not an isolated event, but a turning point in world history. His discovery provided the foundation upon which the age of exploration accelerated, shifting global trade from land-based routes to maritime networks. His legacy is not merely that of a skilled navigator, but of a pioneer who fundamentally altered the course of European expansion. Without his daring voyage, the history of global commerce, empire building, and cultural exchange would have unfolded very differently. Although Bartolomeu Dias' voyage around the Cape of Good Hope was a monumental achievement, his career as an explorer did not end there. His experience and expertise made him an essential figure in Portugal's continued maritime expansion, particularly as the kingdom prepared for future expeditions to India and beyond. While he did not personally lead another long-distance exploration after his historic journey, Dias played a crucial role in shaping the next phase of Portuguese navigation. One of his most significant contributions was his involvement in preparing Vasco da Gama's expedition to India in 1497. Dias had already proven that Africa could be circumnavigated, but additional challenges remained. The exact route from the Cape of Good Hope to India had not been fully mapped, and the conditions of the Indian Ocean were largely unknown to Europeans. Given his experience with the southern Atlantic and African waters, Dias was tasked with helping to plan and advise da Gama's fleet, ensuring that it was equipped to handle the dangers that lay ahead. Dias' knowledge was instrumental in refining Portugal's navigation strategies. He advised on shipbuilding improvements, recommending modifications to the caravels and larger carracks that would make them more suited for extended oceanic voyages. He also helped train da Gama's crew in the Volta do Mar technique, which used wind patterns to optimize long-distance sailing. Without these refinements, da Gama's expedition may not have succeeded in reaching India and returning to Portugal. In addition to his advisory role, Dias personally accompanied da Gama's fleet on the first leg of its journey. He sailed as far as the Cape Verde Islands before turning back, leaving da Gama to complete the mission that Dias had made possible. His presence on this voyage underscores the trust that the Portuguese crown placed in his expertise and the importance of his continued involvement in their exploratory efforts. Although he did not complete the voyage to India himself, his contributions were vital to its success. Beyond da Gama's mission, Dias also played a role in another major Portuguese expedition, the fleet of Pedro Álvares Cabral in 1500. This expedition had the dual objective of reinforcing Portugal's trade presence in India and expanding its influence in the newly discovered lands of the Atlantic. While Dias was not the fleet's commander, he served as one of its captains, demonstrating that his navigational skills were still highly valued by the Portuguese monarchy. Cabral's fleet took a western route across the Atlantic, a decision influenced by the knowledge that winds and currents in that region could facilitate a faster passage to India. This route unexpectedly led to the discovery of Brazil, which would become a key Portuguese colony. While Dias was not directly responsible for this discovery, his participation in the voyage meant that he witnessed the expansion of Portugal's global reach firsthand. However, his role in this expedition would ultimately lead to a tragic end. As Cabral's fleet resumed its journey toward India, it encountered a violent storm near the Cape of Good Hope. Ironically, the very landmark that Dias had successfully navigated years earlier. Several ships were lost in the storm, including the one commanded by Bartolomeu Dias. His ship was wrecked at sea, and he and his crew perished, marking a sorrowful end to the life of one of Portugal's greatest explorers. Dias' death at sea was both fitting and tragic. The man who had been the first to navigate around the Cape of Good Hope met his fate in the same treacherous waters that had defined his legacy. His loss was a blow to Portugal, as he was one of the few remaining navigators with first-hand knowledge of Africa's southern waters. However, his contributions had already secured his place in history, and the course he had set for Portugal's maritime expansion continued without him. Despite his untimely death, Dias' legacy endured in the expeditions that followed. His discoveries enabled Portugal to establish a vast maritime empire, connecting Europe, Africa, and Asia through a network of trade routes that brought immense wealth to the kingdom. His insights into navigation, ship design, and strategic planning influenced generations of explorers, ensuring that his impact lasted far beyond his lifetime. Bartolomeu Dias was more than just a pioneering navigator. He was a foundational figure in the age of exploration. His role in charting new waters and guiding Portugal's future voyages cemented his place as one of history's greatest explorers. Though he did not live to see the full extent of Portugal's dominance in the Indian Ocean, his work made it possible. His journey around the Cape of Good Hope was not just a singular event, but a catalyst that reshaped global trade, politics, and the course of world history. The achievements of Bartolomeu Dias extended far beyond his lifetime, shaping the course of world history for centuries. His successful rounding of the Cape of Good Hope was not only a pivotal moment in the age of exploration, but also a catalyst for profound economic, political, and cultural transformations. The implications of his voyage set in motion a chain of events that redefined global trade, expanded European imperialism, and altered the balance of power among nations. One of the most immediate and lasting effects of Dias' expedition was the establishment of a direct maritime trade route between Europe and Asia. Prior to his discovery, trade with the East had been dominated by overland routes controlled by Middle Eastern and Central Asian empires. The Silk Road and other land-based trade networks were expensive, inefficient, and vulnerable to political instability. By proving that a sea passage around Africa was viable, Dias enabled Portugal to bypass these intermediaries, leading to a new era of maritime commerce. This shift had profound economic consequences. Portugal, once a relatively small kingdom on the edge of Europe, quickly became one of the wealthiest nations of the 16th century. The influx of spices, gold, and other valuable goods from Asia fueled an economic boom that transformed Lisbon into a major center of global trade. Portuguese merchants established lucrative trading posts in India, Southeast Asia, and eventually China, creating a vast commercial network that extended from the Atlantic to the Pacific. The success of Portugal's maritime expansion also had significant geopolitical ramifications. By securing control over the Cape route, Portugal effectively monopolized trade between Europe and the East, challenging the dominance of rival powers such as Venice and the Ottoman Empire. This new balance of power altered global diplomacy, as other European nations sought to challenge Portugal's dominance by launching their own exploratory missions. The voyages of Spain, the Netherlands, and England in the following centuries were all, in some way, influenced by the precedents set by Dias' journey. Another key consequence of Dias' discovery was the expansion of European imperialism. The ability to navigate around Africa gave Portugal and other European nations unprecedented access to distant lands, leading to the colonization of territories in Africa, Asia, and the Americas. This expansion was driven not only by economic ambitions, but also by religious and political motivations. The Portuguese monarchy saw exploration as an opportunity to spread Christianity, establish alliances with non-European rulers, and expand its sphere of influence. However, the legacy of European expansion was not without consequences for the indigenous peoples of the regions that Portugal and other European powers encountered. The opening of new trade routes led to the establishment of colonial rule, the exploitation of local populations, and, in some cases, the destruction of entire societies. While Dias himself did not engage in large-scale colonization, his voyage set the stage for later Portuguese conquests in Africa and Asia, including the establishment of colonial settlements along the African coast. Another major impact of Dias' expedition was the advancement of navigation and maritime technology. His journey demonstrated the need for improved cartography, shipbuilding techniques, and navigational instruments. In the years following his voyage, Portuguese explorers developed more accurate maps, refined their understanding of oceanic currents, and improved ship designs to better withstand long voyages. These advancements laid the foundation for future explorations, including the eventual circumnavigation of the globe by Ferdinand Magellan. Beyond its immediate effects on trade and exploration, Dias' voyage also had a lasting cultural and intellectual impact. The knowledge that Africa could be circumnavigated challenged existing perceptions of geography and expanded Europe's understanding of the world. It also fueled the Renaissance-era curiosity about distant lands, inspiring new waves of exploration, scientific inquiry, and global interconnectedness. This period of discovery helped shape the modern world, as new ideas, goods, and technologies flowed between continents on an unprecedented scale. In addition, the route discovered by Dias remained strategically significant for centuries. Even after Portugal's dominance declined, the Cape of Good Hope continued to be a critical waypoint for maritime trade. During the colonial period, the Dutch and British established control over the region, recognizing its importance as a refueling station for ships traveling between Europe and Asia. The opening of the Suez Canal in 1869 eventually reduced the reliance on the Cape route, but the legacy of Dias' discovery endured as a key milestone in global navigation. The impact of Bartolomeu Dias' voyage cannot be overstated. His daring expedition reshaped the course of world history, ushering in an era of global trade, exploration, and cultural exchange. By proving that the seas could be mastered and distant lands could be reached, he laid the foundation for centuries of maritime expansion. His achievements, though sometimes overshadowed by later explorers, remain a testament to the courage, ingenuity, and ambition that defined the age of exploration. Bartolomeu Dias occupies a central position in the age of exploration, a period marked by unprecedented maritime expansion, global trade, and cultural exchange. While figures like Christopher Columbus, Vasco da Gama, and Ferdinand Magellan are often more widely recognized, Dias' contribution was equally crucial in shaping the course of world history. His pioneering journey around the Cape of Good Hope laid the groundwork for later explorations, proving that the Atlantic and Indian Oceans were connected and that a sea route to Asia was within reach. Dias' voyage was a defining moment in Portugal's rise as a global power. Before his expedition, Portuguese navigators had gradually pushed southward along the African coast, mapping uncharted territories and establishing trading outposts. However, uncertainty remained about whether Africa could be circumnavigated. Many scholars and sailors feared that the continent extended indefinitely or that impassable waters lay beyond its southernmost point. Dias' successful rounding of the Cape shattered these doubts, demonstrating that the world's oceans were interconnected and navigable. His expedition not only answered a major geographical question, but also accelerated Portugal's ambitions for maritime supremacy. Without Dias' achievement, Vasco da Gama's journey to India in 1497 might not have been possible. Dias provided the essential knowledge that enabled Portugal to refine its navigation techniques, prepare its fleets, and ultimately dominate the Indian Ocean trade routes. His discovery was a turning point that shifted global commerce from overland routes controlled by Middle Eastern and Asian empires to maritime routes controlled by European powers. Unlike Columbus, whose voyage across the Atlantic led to the European discovery of the Americas, Dias' journey was part of a carefully planned and state-sponsored strategy. King João II of Portugal had long envisioned an oceanic route to India, and Dias' mission was a calculated step in fulfilling that goal. While Columbus' westward expedition was based on the uncertain belief that Asia lay just across the Atlantic, Dias' voyage was grounded in progressive, step-by-step exploration along Africa's coast. This methodical approach reflected Portugal's scientific and navigational advancements, setting it apart from other European powers. Despite his achievements, Dias' name is often overshadowed by later explorers. Vasco da Gama's successful voyage to India and Magellan's circumnavigation of the globe are often considered more dramatic feats. However, without Dias' pioneering effort, these later achievements would have been significantly more difficult, if not impossible. Dias was a true pathfinder, cutting through centuries of speculation and proving what was possible. His legacy is that of a navigator who paved the way for global exploration, even if he did not personally reach India or establish long-term trade networks. One reason for Dias' relative obscurity compared to his contemporaries is that he did not bring back the kind of immediate, tangible wealth that Columbus or da Gama did. Columbus' voyages resulted in the European discovery of vast new lands, while da Gama's journey led directly to the lucrative spice trade with India. Dias, in contrast, proved a route existed but did not personally capitalize on its economic potential. His contribution was foundational rather than immediately profitable, which may explain why his fame was not as widespread as that of other explorers. Nevertheless, his role in the age of exploration cannot be underestimated. Dias was among the first navigators to face the full force of the Atlantic's southern tempests, enduring the dangers of unknown waters, treacherous currents, and harsh conditions. His courage and seamanship set a new standard for Portuguese explorers who followed in his wake. The skills he developed, navigating open seas, understanding wind patterns, and adapting to long voyages, became essential for future expeditions and helped establish Portugal's dominance in maritime exploration. In addition to his direct contributions, Dias' expedition had a ripple effect on other European nations. His success demonstrated that the world's oceans could be mastered, inspiring rival powers such as Spain, England, and the Netherlands to pursue their own maritime ambitions. The competitive spirit of the age of exploration was fueled in part by Dias' discoveries, as other European nations sought to match or surpass Portugal's achievements. His journey helped trigger an era of exploration that reshaped the political and economic landscape of the world. The Cape of Good Hope itself became one of the most important strategic locations in global trade. Named by King João II to reflect its promise as a gateway to India, it served as a key refueling and supply station for European ships for centuries. Even after Portugal's decline as a maritime power, the route Dias discovered remained vital to global commerce, influencing trade patterns well into the modern era. His expedition had long-term consequences that extended far beyond his own lifetime. In assessing Bartolomeu Dias' place in history, it is clear that he was not merely an explorer, but a trailblazer who helped define an era. His journey was an essential link in the chain of events that led to global exploration, empire building, and the eventual creation of a connected world economy. While he may not have received the same level of recognition as some of his successors, his role in the age of exploration remains undeniable. Dias was a navigator of extraordinary skill and vision, whose daring expedition changed the course of history forever. The legacy of Bartolomeu Dias extends far beyond the immediate impact of his pioneering journey around the Cape of Good Hope. His voyage not only revolutionized maritime navigation, but also set the stage for centuries of global exploration, trade, and imperial expansion. While his name may not be as widely recognized as some of his contemporaries, such as Vasco da Gama or Christopher Columbus, Dias' achievements were foundational to the age of exploration, and his influence continues to be felt in the present day. His legacy transcends the limits of his own time, shaping the world in profound ways that resonate across history. One of the most enduring aspects of Dias' legacy is the transformation of global trade routes. By proving that a sea passage around Africa was not only possible, but viable, Dias opened the door to direct maritime trade between Europe and Asia. This development was revolutionary for several reasons. It allowed Portugal and other European powers to bypass the costly overland trade networks controlled by the Ottoman Empire, Venice, and other middlemen. It established the primacy of maritime commerce in the early modern period, and it contributed to the economic and political shifts that would define the next several centuries of global history. The consequences of Dias' voyage were particularly significant for Portugal. The Portuguese monarchy, motivated by the promise of wealth from direct access to the spice trade, invested heavily in further maritime exploration. Dias' success served as a model for subsequent Portuguese navigators, most notably Vasco da Gama, who used the Cape route to reach India in 1498. This milestone was directly tied to the work of Dias, whose expertise in navigation and the ability to endure the harsh conditions of the southern Atlantic became the bedrock for future Portuguese success in the Indian Ocean. Through his efforts, Portugal cemented its position as one of the dominant maritime empires of the 16th century. Beyond the specific economic and geopolitical consequences of his discovery, Dias' influence also extended into the cultural realm. The opening of new sea routes had a profound effect on the Renaissance worldview. The age of exploration challenged established perceptions of geography and sparked a new intellectual curiosity about the world. As European navigators discovered new lands and encountered previously unknown cultures, the Renaissance's emphasis on humanism and curiosity about the natural world was invigorated. Dias, as a key figure in this period, played an important role in transforming Europe's conception of its place in the world and its potential for discovery. While much of the focus during this era was on the establishment of trade routes and the accumulation of wealth, Dias also contributed to the advancement of scientific knowledge. His navigation techniques, including the use of the Volta do Mar, the return of the sea, became crucial for later explorations and were incorporated into the broader maritime knowledge of the time. His success in navigating the southern Atlantic, an area previously feared for its unpredictable weather and hazardous waters, expanded the limits of European maritime knowledge, making further exploration of the world's oceans possible. Furthermore, Dias' discovery also influenced the religious and ideological aims of Portugal's exploration. Like many of his contemporaries, Dias was part of a broader effort to spread Christianity beyond European borders. While his immediate goals were largely focused on trade, the Portuguese crown sought to expand its religious and cultural influence alongside its commercial ambitions. The idea of Christianizing distant lands was integral to the justification for colonial expansion, and Dias' journey contributed to this mission by establishing routes that would later facilitate the arrival of missionaries in Africa and Asia. His voyages were thus a key part of the missionary enterprise that became synonymous with European imperialism. In addition to the economic and cultural shifts, Dias' journey also had a profound military significance. Portugal's rise as a maritime power was not solely dependent on trade, but also on its ability to defend its new routes and territories. The establishment of fortified trading posts along the coasts of Africa and Asia helped Portugal maintain its dominance in global trade. This strategy of militarization, which was initiated during Dias' time, continued to be a cornerstone of Portuguese colonialism. The military presence in key locations such as Mozambique, Goa, and Malacca was vital for the protection of Portugal's economic interests and the maintenance of its influence in the Indian Ocean region. The significance of Dias' legacy also extends to the more global nature of modern trade and travel. Today, the world is interconnected in ways that Dias could have scarcely imagined. The trade networks that his discovery helped establish have grown into the modern global economy, with goods, information, and people traveling across continents more freely than ever before. The maritime infrastructure he helped develop laid the foundation for the rise of global shipping, port cities, and international commerce that define the modern world. Despite the challenges that followed his journey, including the eventual decline of Portuguese maritime dominance, the strategic importance of Dias' discovery continued to shape world history. His legacy lives on in the geography of global trade, the cultural exchanges that occurred between East and West, and the technological advancements in navigation and shipbuilding that arose as a result of his work. Even as the political and economic power of Portugal waned, the routes he uncovered remained vital, and the world's increasing interconnectedness bore the imprint of his early explorations. Bartolomeu Dias' place in history is secure as a pioneering explorer whose efforts set the stage for centuries of global exploration and trade. His voyage around the Cape of Good Hope was not only a monumental achievement in itself, but it also paved the way for future discoveries and the rise of Portugal as a leading maritime empire. Dias' contributions to navigation, global commerce, and cultural exchange left an indelible mark on the world, and his legacy continues to shape the modern global landscape. Though he may not have received the same level of recognition as other explorers, his role in the age of exploration was indispensable, and his impact is still felt today.